as we move on to our next keynote presentation. Now, as AI adoption accelerates, the role of governance becomes more critical than ever. And coming up next, we are going to hear about proven frameworks, ethical standards, national AI roadmaps designed to ensure AI is deployed safely, fairly, and effectively. Let's put our hands together and welcome Richard Stirling, Chief Executive Officer of Oxford Insights, to share with us more. Over to you, Richard.
Good afternoon. So the world is facing a number of challenges. One is the fundamental AI models are getting ever more powerful. You just heard about the developments from Quen and Alibaba. And if you look at the performance of the foundational models across some of the main benchmarks, like which ones are best at using tools, how are they using adaptive reasoning? There's even a test called Humanity's Last Exam, which was designed to be really difficult, measure progress over a number of years. GPT-5 just scored 40% in that exam. When it was released, the best performing was 15%. So the performance of these models is getting more powerful every day. And they're being used by more and more people. Yeah, they're just dropping a few statistics here. Like 83% of companies report that their top strategic priority is harnessing AI. 52% of people working in those companies are worried that AI is going to steal their job. 24% of corporate press releases are now used by LLMs. Even the UN, traditionally quite a slow-moving body at times, 14% of UN press releases have been drafted with the assistance of LLMs. And for small companies, they're starting to use LLMs in helping to describe their job descriptions. So 10 to 15% of job postings from small companies are drafted using LLMs. So these ever more powerful models are being used ever more in our wider society. And that's the challenge that we're set up to address. So we've decided to help governments get ready for AI. And we do this through our flagship publication, the Government AI Readiness Index, which has been used in over 70 countries sort of for benchmarking progress in their strategies, and has been referenced by leading organizations like UNESCO, the G20, OECD. And what we're doing is we're measuring AI readiness holistically across the whole economy. So we've got a theory of change of what it means for a country to be AI ready. So we think it needs an internally ready government, a technology sector that's developed and able to supply the things that government needs, and it has access to all the necessary data and infrastructure to be able to deploy AI. And we've got 40 indicators across these pillars from a mix of like primary and secondary sources. And if we look at the review that we did in 2024, so the AI Readiness Index in 2024, the sort of key findings at a global level are that AI strategies are on the rise. So there was a period where lots of countries were creating new AI strategies, and that had sort of tailed off for a couple of years, and that's now back up on the rise, with growing publications from low and middle-income countries. The middle-income economies are actually closing the gap in AI readiness, basically because they're getting the basics right. They're taking advantage of the fact that a number of countries have already done the initial steps in this, and they're focusing on execution and getting their basics right, and they're leapfrogging. Now, unsurprisingly, the US leads the pack in AI readiness, and that's not because they're doing anything particularly special. It's because they have an enormous amount of money sat in Silicon Valley, which is investing in AI. So that sort of private sector money is the thing that has them first. If you take that out, then they drop back quite a long way. And the sort of final, almost bonus insight here is that AI governance is something which is on the march. So regional cooperation, as we've seen in various of the rooms and the talks here, is something which is on the rise. So it's something where regional cooperation is establishing the right norms and frameworks for deployment within that region. And if you look at ASEAN specifically, then you can see that ASEAN is making great strides in AI. So if you look at the regional breakdown, then East Asia, which is not ASEAN, but East Asia is third. But if you look at the regional breakdown with like who has the most improvement by region, then East Asia has the biggest percentage improvement and scores of any region in the world. And if we drill down then into Malaysia, then Malaysia does better than the regional average, but there's some scope for improvement. Like the real positives here are Malaysia has a really clear vision for how AI can be harnessed for the benefit of Malaysia. And you heard that yesterday in the opening keynotes, where you had a deeply passionate, knowledgeable minister stand on stage and talk about how AI was going to transform the economy in Malaysia. And you had a prime minister talking about how that needs to fit into the strategic vision for Malaysia over the coming 10 years. So that's a massive positive. You also have a highly skilled workforce and large amounts of compute. If you look at the global leaders in compute worldwide, then Malaysia is in the top 5. And it's rapidly closing on the people above. However, the AI industry writ large is still early. Yeah, there's a number of startups here today, and you saw announcements yesterday about the sovereign AI. What these need to do is they need to hit scale. And there's a challenge there around scaling those startups. And the performance in compute isn't matched across the whole AI value chain. So if you look at the whole AI value chain, then the compute is fantastic, but others still need a little bit of work. So that's the sort of competitive landscape. And against that competitive landscape, the question that governments need to ask themselves is, do we want to go fantastic, all guns blazing for innovation, or are we worried and we want to regulate and make sure that as this innovation comes through, then we don't get the bad things? And this is a sort of classic tension within government. And I'd argue that the correct response to this tension is to try and quickly establish the right ground rules so that everybody has certainty and the innovation can come through. And a number of countries at the moment are trying to answer that question and work out where they stand in the sort of spectrum of balancing these two things. So at one end of the spectrum, you have the European Union with the EU AI Act, which is, by international standards, it's quite strict. So if you have a world-class LLM, then there are a whole bunch of extra compliance burdens that you need to go through, and these are all formed into statute. And at the other extreme, you have the USA, where, frankly, they've just stepped back from AI regulation. At a federal level, they're not doing anything, particularly under the current administration. And it's being led by states. So it's not true to say that the US there is no AI regulation in the USA. It's none at the USA level. And then you have states like, say, California, who are taking through state-level legislation. Now, I think a question for governments today is to work out where they want to be on this spectrum. And then once they've done that, there are 3 broad approaches to dealing with this sort of governance and regulatory challenge. The first approach is take hard law. Like, make sure you have the rules of the road set out, like all the powers in the right places, you have the right governance structures, you have the right bodies, and you can take enforcement action if you want. The second is in policy. So this is going into like more detail on the regulations, and it's something which can be changed a little bit faster. The third is using your convening power. So once you've worked out what you want to do, government has an amazing ability to bring people together, to marshal action to get there. So looking at that in a little bit more detail. So as I said, you need a law to create the right powers and structures. And a nice example here is the AI Act in South Korea. So the AI Act in South Korea was the second comprehensive AI law in the world. And what they've done with it is they have codified a risk-based approach. So what they're looking at is they're looking at how the types of risks and challenges that could be thrown up by the AI or by LLMs, and focusing on those. And then when it's used in a particular setting, then there is a higher standard that needs to be met. So if you're using an AI in healthcare or in energy or in public services, then there are extra tests that you have to do. And with the AI law, they've also created the right institutions. So they've set up the institutional framework that they can use for the next 10 years of AI development. So there's a national AI control tower, an AI safety institute, and there's the power for government to be able to invest in AI data centers, startups, and SMEs. And alongside this sort of risk-based approach, the institutional framework, they've also done two other things. One is they've got mandatory transparency for generative AI. So if you have a generative AI system which is used in Korea, then you need to register that. And it needs to be labeling all of the content so that you can see it was generated using an artificial intelligence rather than created by a person. And the final thing is around scope. So normally if you create a law and it covers everything that happens within your country. It doesn't cover what happens in your neighboring country. And that's just a sort of standard legal principle. But here, because lots of the AI systems are deployed through cloud services or from data centers which are hosted abroad, then they have deliberately taken a global scope. So it covers every service, everywhere, which offers or could be used in South Korea. So if the user of a service is based in South Korea, then the South Korean AI Act applies. Now, I said that this all feels quite dry, right? But the purpose of legislation here is to make sure the power is in the right hands and you have the right institutions. So it should feel dry and it should feel not that nimble. Because the purpose of policy is then to be nimble and to regulate what's actually going on. And you need your policy to provide that adaptive framework that responds to innovation. And there's a couple of examples that I want to walk through here. One from Estonia and one from Singapore, because they achieve similar things, but they take different paths to it. And part of what I'm trying to get across here is that there are multiple ways of solving this problem. One isn't better or worse than the other. They're just different ways. And you need to find the way that works for you. So in Estonia, that way is they have decided that the public sector is going to be the pioneer. If there is a new approach, new bit of technology, they want the public sector to be the first people who are using it. And they're doing that deliberately. This is, I'm sure you all know, Estonia has some of the best digital public services in the world because they do this approach. But it also means that as a new technology comes in, if they're the first people to adopt, they have first-hand implementation experience. So the public servants who are creating the regulation are also the public servants who understand how the technology works and the type of issues that come up. So this sort of public service as a pioneer actually drastically upskills the public service in that new technology. It means the regulation is smart, and it naturally is responsive because people are using and finding the problems in their day-to-day life. And alongside that, as you might imagine, like if they're pioneering something, they keep tripping over, making mistakes, learning something new. They have a really responsive and adaptive policy framework. So they have something which is designed so it can iterate. It evolves over time as they get more experience. And this is baked into ministries' operating plans. Like every ministry needs to have an AI plan. They need to be adopting AI, using it in their services, and then thinking about how the industry that they cover or they regulate, how they might be doing it and what needs to change about their regulatory environment and keep that up to date. So they're keeping pace with developments. Now that's sort of one approach, like the public sector as a pioneer. It's the very Estonian approach. Another approach is one taken by Singapore. So the Singaporean framework, the way they approach regulation, right, is they create a voluntary framework. So they create lots of standards. So there is a model AI governance framework, an AI verify testing toolkit, none of which is mandatory, but which is good practice and is seen as good practice and encouraged. And they create that and they encourage it. And then they have sectoral sandboxes. So they go, right, so AI could be really useful and interesting in healthcare. The existing healthcare regulations probably don't cover it very well. Let's create a sandbox. Let's create an environment where innovation can go, be watched and scrutinized to make sure that it's working as intended. And we can use that as a way of learning what's coming through and what's going on within industry. And then we can write a new regulatory environment, test it, and then if it works, then we take it out of the sandbox environment and put it into the main regulation. Now that's an alternative approach where you're embracing the private sector innovation, having it within an environment where you can see and you can learn what's happening, and then you design the regulation. And the third approach, or third strand that I had there, was a government as a convener. And what I want to do here is talk about another example, because government has this great role to play in directing focus and establishing standards. And the example that I want to talk to here is the AI Safety Institute from the UK. Now, this was a couple of years ago, the UK government was looking at AI and thinking about how could this play out in 5-10 years' time. And it could see some pretty big existential risks. And then there's some sort of second-order risks that come underneath that. And at the time, people weren't sure how to do the evaluations of the models, and there was just a bunch of uncertainty. So government, rather than going, we have all of the solutions, government went, right, so we can see that there's some problems. We'll acknowledge that there are some problems. We don't mind putting some money up to try and solve these problems. They created the AI Safety Institute. That acted almost like a global catalyst at the time. So it was launched at the AI Safety Summit, and as part of that, they managed to get unprecedented access to frontier models from OpenAI, DeepMind, Anthropic, so that they could do some independent evaluation and testing. It inspired the US and now 11 other countries to establish their own AI safety institutes. So they catalyzed a global movement. And because of this sort of convening function, and that it was around a mission and something that people could really get behind, then they managed to do something that lots of people say is impossible, right? They got some of the brightest and best people from the industry to come and work inside government. And to do that at a dramatic pay cut versus what they would get in the private sector. And they were able to do that because it was the importance of the mission. And I would argue that using these three approaches, like using the law to get the right institutions and power, the right policy environment to be able to embrace the innovation and amend the regulations as developments happen, and identifying the big challenges and bringing people and the industry together to help solve them together, like, we'll be able to make huge progress. You know, AI is here. It's just at the back of the room. We use it every day, and what we need to do now, today, is act to manage it. Thank you very much.